Hi, welcome back to Mr. Slover's Math. Today we're going to talk about simplifying absolute value. So that is our target for the day. You're going to find the absolute value of an expression. So before we get into simplifying, let's talk about what absolute value is. The absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So in this diagram it says, here's 0. 6 is 6 away from 0. But the same thing as -6 is also 6 away from 0. So it doesn't matter that it's positive or negative, they're both 6 units away. So think about if you're in gym class and your gym teacher wants you to walk 3 laps. And then after you walk the second lap, your gym teacher tells you to turn around and do the other lap in the opposite direction. You're still walking a lap, it's just in a different direction. Okay, so it would still be 3 laps that you walked total. It's the same idea for absolute value. It's your distance from 0, whether that's to the right of 0 or to the left of 0. It doesn't matter. Your symbol kind of looks like an 11 that is slanted. Okay, that is the symbol for absolute value. Once you take the absolute value of something, that symbol is gone. So if I look at example 1, and all of this is finding the absolute value. Letter A says the absolute value of 5. Well, that's your distance from 5. So once I take the absolute value of 5, I don't put the bars in my answer. There's no absolute bars in my answer because I already took the absolute value. So letter B, the absolute value of -3. Well, that's 3 units away from 0. For letter C, so now I have an operation inside the absolute value. I got to do that first. So I do -3 plus 5 first to get 2. But I still have the absolute value. I didn't take the absolute value yet. All I did was the calculation on the inside. I simplified that expression. So I'm at the absolute value of 2, which becomes 2. Letter D, same thing. I do what's on the inside of the absolute value first. I do 3 minus 6 to get -3. And then I take the absolute value of -3. So that's 3 units away from 0. So letter E. And I've got a note here. It says do absolute value and then add in, then just add. So I take the absolute value of -3 first, which becomes 3. I take the absolute value of 5, which becomes 5. Then I can add 3 plus 5 to get the 8. I have to do the absolute values first, and then I do everything that's on the outside of the absolute value. So -4, the absolute value is 4. Absolute value of 6 is 6. And I have a minus in between. 4 minus 6 is -2. So right here, this is the first time that we see a value that is negative. So yes, you can have a negative value after you simplify. Okay, but that worked because I am subtracting outside of my absolute values. Okay, your absolute value, all the stuff that's inside of your absolute value bars, does always become positive because it's always the positive distance from 0. Okay, but if you're doing other operations outside of the absolute value, you can and you will get negative values. So letter G, I do what's inside the absolute value first. -2 minus -3 becomes a 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. I add 1, because there's 1 on the outside, becomes 2. Letter H, I do not take that negative and distribute it inside. Okay, that's not what we're doing. It's the same thing on I and J and K and L. You do not distribute anything inside the absolute value. You do the absolute value first. Whatever's inside of the absolute value bars, you do that first. So the absolute value of 6 is 6. Then the negative comes down, and that's it. I already took the absolute value. I'm not going to do it again. Letter I, 12 minus 15, take the absolute value. So that would be absolute value of -3 is 3, but that negative trickles on down. All right, same thing for those 3. Try those on your own. Hit pause on the video, see how you do. So the back side is the same idea, except now I'm asking you to evaluate. So this is similar to the review that we started this semester with. Take your value, substitute it in. The only difference is now I have absolute value. So the absolute value of 4 plus 6 is going to be the absolute value of 10, which is 10. And then that minus 14 or subtract 14 still carries all the way through. You cannot plug all of this into the calculator that you guys have. We don't have, or you don't have, graphing calculators. You have standard scientific calculators. Okay, your absolute value is not in there. You can't do this in your calculator, which is why I have all of these steps shown. I have all of my work for all of these. So example 3, it says evaluate the following expression if w equals -2. So anywhere I see a w, now I'm plugging in -2, and then I'm performing whatever operations I need to. Remember, you do everything inside the absolute value bars first. Then you can do anything else that's out there. And then the same thing with the last one. Example 4 is probably the most complicated ones that you're going to see. We've talked about this before. Complicated doesn't necessarily mean that they're super difficult. It just means that there's a lot of steps, and that's why it's complicated. Okay, but we break them into manageable steps. Let's plug in -7 where we see g first. Let's do some multiplication. Remember, we're focusing on inside the absolute value. 2 times -7 is going to give us a -14. -14 minus 4 is -18. Okay. Take the absolute value of -18 to get 18. Now that the absolute value bars are gone, I can do all the other stuff that was on the outside of my absolute values. So I can do 3 times 18 to get 54. Then I can add the 10 to get 64. Go ahead and try letter B, and when you're done, check to see if you got it right. If you need to, you can pause the video. All right, so today we focused on absolute value. That is the distance from 0. Right? If you walk forward 6 steps and then you walk backwards 6 steps, you covered the same amount of distance. Right? Just because you walked backwards doesn't mean you're going to say, oh, I did -6 steps. Nope, you still did 6 steps. Right? So your absolute value is always the distance from 0. It's always going to be positive. Now, your answer after you simplify could be negative. And that's because there were other operations or other numbers on the outside of your absolute value that